Mr. Zatko, I want to explore just in the next 6 minutes the kind of data that is available on American citizens that can be used for appropriate or inappropriate purposes. You're familiar with the concept of ubiquitous technical surveillance, aren't you?
I can understand those words together and get the general context, I believe, sir. Yes.
Basically, all the cameras that are publicly posted, data on your smartphone, you've already talked about geolocation data, the type of transactions you engage in, where your home is, how much you paid for it. Even Google Earth may have taken a picture of your home or your place of business. So there's already huge volumes of data available for whatever purposes, even above and beyond what social media collects, correct?
Yes, sir. There's a lot of information about a lot of us in many different ways available through technology right now.
And I dare say, I bet most Americans just can't fathom the volume of data, and that's without even getting to things like social media. For example, in 2015, I think it was, there was a hack of the Office of Personnel Management records. I think it was 22 million records of government employees, including their applications for security clearances, was hacked reportedly by the People's Republic of China. And then if people decide that they want to figure out their family ancestry and use one of the DNA testing companies, my understanding is much of the testing is outsourced to places like China, where obviously it's not secure from Chinese government access. And so when we're talking about the privacy concerns of Americans, this is not just limited to platforms like Twitter and social media, correct?
That is correct, sir. I was informed I was in that OPM database and that my information and my security clearance information was collected as well.
And turning to Twitter, you've already talked about the lack of what I would call protection from insider threats in the intelligence community. If you're working in the intelligence community, they have logging protocols that will determine who accesses what information, correct? So it can be audited later on to determine whether there had been inappropriate access. That's the sort of protocols or mechanisms that were not available at places like Twitter when you worked there, correct?
Yes, sir, correct.
And so anyone who could get access to that information could, on top of all the information that I asked you about earlier outside of social media, if you look at the cumulative data picture, is that the kind of information that foreign governments like the People's Republic of China are regularly accessing for their purposes?
I can't say whether they are regularly accessing. I don't have that direct information. I am aware that some people and organizations have gotten very good at cross-indexing across very large amounts of data collected on numerous people from various sources, OPM, medical, et cetera. Twitter would be a very decent contribution to that multi-source collection.
And that's where things like artificial intelligence can come in to comb or mine vast sources of data for a more targeted or narrow purpose. Is that right?
The ability to collect and mine, yes, has been augmented by modern AI techniques.
So there are what I would call defensive concerns about people's or individuals or governments' access to your personal data, but there are also offensive concerns as well, and that's where the issue of disinformation, or a term that became popularized during the 2016 election aftermath, was active measures. These are efforts by foreign governments, perhaps foreign intelligence services, to actively create a narrative or a message that is essentially propaganda by this foreign government that can be used to try to influence American public opinion. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir, not just American, that has happened worldwide, such as Myanmar, and in 2018, Facebook acknowledging that the disinformation campaigns on their platform contributed to genocide.
And as you pointed out earlier, it's not just when you're looking at the data that is available on each one of us as American citizens for whatever purposes, for good or ill, there's also a lot of information about who we interact with, right? There's something in the intelligence community, sometimes they talk about pattern of life. Maybe you'd want to talk about a network of friends and associates, family members and the like, from which inquiring minds could obtain additional data about us.
Yes, and to your point, information operations are of a concern. Twitter acknowledges that they do happen on their platform. They have disclosed numerous ones, and they are aware of others that are ongoing.
I'm aware that TikTok, which is a Chinese company, I believe, and even Instagram, which is owned by Facebook, have 13-year-old age restrictions in terms of their terms of use. But there's no limitation on people's ability to pretend to be an adult, to pretend to be somebody that they're not, and gain access to social media accounts and to use it for whatever purpose that they wish.
I can't speak to TikTok or Facebook. I'm not familiar with their internal technology for age gating. I do know that that was a challenge at Twitter, and from what I was told, the majority of age gating was voluntary self-reporting of what your age was.
And finally, can you tell me, do you have recommendations based on your 30 years of experience in terms of data security and what sort of regulations or laws that Congress and the federal government should consider passing? We don't have time to talk about all those here today, but we'd certainly welcome any of your recommendations and insights. Do you think this needs to be an area where the federal government needs to be actively engaged?
Yes, sir, I do. I'd be happy to supplement my written report.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Cornyn. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming to testify, Mr. Zacco. Your testimony and all of your responses to the various questions we asked you says to me that the situation regarding data security and national security issues with regard to Twitter is massive, and that Twitter is not doing very much to be helpful at all. In fact, there are major disincentives to Twitter doing anything, to spending the time or the resources to address the concerns that you raise. So, for example, the FTC, very out-resourced with regard to trying to keep Twitter under any kind of even a consent decree that was entered into back in 2011. And more recently, they're contemplating making Twitter pay $150 million for some misuse of information, $150 million fine for a multi-billion-dollar company is nothing to provide any kind of incentives for them to change what they're doing. And yes, there is information out there from so many different sources, including our appliances and cars and everything else. However, Twitter is a huge, if I can call it, a single platform where one can access information. So who is going to force Twitter really to do anything? If we were to adopt some of the legislation that's contemplated, if we don't have an agency that can implement and enforce that law, then we are back where we started from. So what is it going to take to force Twitter to change its ways?
Well, this starts at the top in Twitter, and you need an executive team that is willing to go in and say, you know, the executive team themselves acknowledged, and I heard them say, we have 10 years of unpaid debt here that at some point we really need to get ahead of. They need to prioritize that. And to my understanding, you know, a board's primary role is to make sure the right executives are in charge of the company, the CEO in particular, to make sure they are sending the company in the right direction. This needs to be a long-term incentive rather than short-term incentives for the companies, because the short-term incentives just mean that they're going to tactically run from fire to fire and not actually pay down debt for a long-lived, valuable company.
So your description of Twitter, though, is they're mainly focused on the short-term monetary incentives. Who's going to force them to look at the long term? Do people need to go to prison? I mean, what do we need to do to get Twitter to at least from what you're telling me, they cannot even identify foreign agents in their midst.
Yes, ma'am. And, to be blunt, some foreign agents will probably be pretty good and difficult to identify, but some were, in this case, not. And they're only, to my awareness, being identified when they're brought to them. They're not even attempting to. I think holding people accountable is a good start. I think that is something that people are concerned of. But you can only hold people accountable if you can measure and quantify what their targets are and what changes need to happen. And if you say, such as what I saw, Twitter needs to have a mature software security program, that's a very ambiguous and qualitative term. So holding accountability and setting quantitative goals and standards that can be measured and audited independently